I'm Escambia County Sheriff David Morgan, and thank you for watching Ask the Sheriff. This is your chance to ask me any questions you want answered about the ECSO. Our team hits the streets again, and here are some of the questions you asked. Leslie asked, what kind of quote-unquote real gang activity do we have in Escambia County other than drug dealing? Leslie, when I took office, the approach from the local governments, both city and county, was to basically ignore that there was any gang issues in Escambia County. I will tell you that, I did a career in the United States Air Force. I did a lengthy tour of duty in California prior to being assigned to Florida when I retired out at Eglin Air Force Base. And then my family and I moved to Pensacola into Escambia County. It became very apparent to me, moving over here in 1993, that there was gang and/or gang activity in Escambia County. And the reason why is because when you drove around town or drove around the county, I would observe the gang graffiti. It's called tagging in the game parlance, meaning that we want to mark our territory and let folks know that our gang is here. We've been through this area. Many times it's used to taunt each other, meaning I make an incurrence on another gang's turf, and the way I prove that is I tag your area. So now you know that the Bloods or the Crips or whatever the gang is has gone past their gang boundaries and gone into yours. And as you can well imagine, over those minor incursions, because it's all about saving face and machismo and everything else, that can start a shooting war. Now, we're very fortunate in Escambia County. Most of our gangs are what we call local or hybrid gangs. At last count, we're up to about 21 or 22 local gangs. We kind of leveled off at 17 for some time. The reason why I call them gangs is, Florida has a gang statute, and if you meet certain criteria, any organized group of people can in fact be categorized as a criminal gang, a criminal activity. If not, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts could be, called a gang because they meet all the criteria except for, their primary purpose is, the engagement in criminal activity, whether it's the selling of drugs, prostitution, it could be murder, theft, there are organized burglary rings, etc. On any given day in Escambia County, we estimate through the use of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement statistics and the Attorney General's Gang Task Force folks that we have probably about 300 individuals engaged in criminal activity that we can tie to a gang in Escambia County. But you are correct, their primary means of income, if you will, generation, as with almost everything today, it's somehow tied with drugs. Some of the larger gangs, and we do have some motorcycle gangs in Escambia County. We have at least two that have a semi-permanent residence. We have many that traverse our county. They also are engaged in that. Some, they're involved in strong-arm sides of gang activity, which is enforcement. Where they, criminal activity requires certain legitimate businesses to pay protection. That's very low level here. Occasionally you'll get a gang that does, murders for hire. That's very low level here, by the way. It's usually prostitution, some counterfeiting, some illegal activity involving credit cards. Some of these areas are outside what we do in Escambia County at the Sheriff's Office. While we detect it, we don't necessarily do the long investigation. Like in the event of counterfeiting of credit cards, that belongs to the United States Secret Service. So when we detect that, we'll work the initial front part of that activity and then turn it over to the United States Secret Service because that's specifically in their charter involving credit cards and counterfeiting, etc. So we've got, what I would call gang activity in Escambia County. I think for similar communities our size and some larger, we almost always mirror national averages. But I will also tell you as a citizen, if you are not in the bad part of town, if you will, where there's a lot of criminal activity, prostitution, drug dealing, and you avoid those areas, you probably won't be a victim of this crime. As I tell folks, the study of victimization is very big. So while you hear what I've said and it's somewhat alarming because you're not aware of the breadth and depth of the criminal activity in our county, especially involving gangs, the probability of you becoming a victim of one of those crimes is very small if you're not visiting that area of town or hanging out in the venues that they do. If you're not hanging out in known biker bars or gang bars, you're probably not going to be a victim of any of that. Trouble will follow you if you determine that that's where you want to go. So again, if you're just the average everyday citizen, the chances of you ever having any contact with this sort of criminal activity is slim and none. One of the questions was, the individual says, I hear crime is down, the new crime stats are in, but why is it that I hear everywhere about the crime or that crime is up? That's very frustrating for us, I will tell you, in law enforcement, especially when we are very meticulous in our record keeping and our reporting to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and then on to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who keeps the national crime stats. It's about to change, but it's still called the Uniform Crime Report, the UCR, published every year by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and it gives a kind of a snapshot of crime and crime trends throughout the United States. And of course, what we're concerned about here specifically is Florida and any spillover, if you will, from the adjoining states, and how does it affect our crime here. I will tell you that crime is down in Escambia County. Again, the numbers are there, and the numbers clearly indicate that. But I will tell you also that in the media, there's a phrase called, if it bleeds, it leads. What can we do to put on television that will increase our viewership, which increases our advertising amounts that we can charge, etc. And so that's media driven. The media has morphed from a part of government, if you will. I grew up in a time where they were referred to as the fourth branch of government. You have the executive, legislative, and judicial. And when I was a child growing up, the media, because of the First Amendment, was considered to be the fourth arm, meaning that they were completely and totally independent, and they were the bringers of the truth. It didn't matter about politics. It didn't matter about affiliations. They were there to report the story as they saw it, meaning that these are the facts, and this is, some may like it, some may not. That's not the case anymore. I will tell you that the media is a business, and while I would still include them as a very important business, they are also market driven. My time as sheriff, I can tell you that we had some very important critical cases that are interesting in and of themselves, that our community should have been advised of, and along the way of this case kept apprised of it. And we literally would get bumped because there was a more titillating or exciting case that come along, and so that was now old news. While it's a case that should have been continued and investigated, and our community should have been informed through the media. So that's why you think that everybody's talking about crime and crime's just exploding all around you, is because it's in your face. And as I've told folks, about what I call the new car syndrome. You buy a new car of whatever make it is, for the next 6 months you'll see that car everywhere because it's in your face. And that's what happens with crime, and especially when crime sells. Crime sells newspapers, it sells television time, etc. The good stories do not. Carrie Ann's question was, is there a program in the city or the county for cleaning up graffiti? Carrie Ann, yes. Contact your Board of County Commissioners, or if you live in the city, your city council member. What they do is they make arrangements through some of our work release programs and the county work crews, which work out of Muskogee Road. It's referred to as the work camp. And those inmates are normally, tasked with going around and cleaning up the graffiti. So the answer is yes. Again, go to your Board of County Commissioners, or if you live in the city, to your appropriate city council member in the city. John asked, somewhat accusatory, why isn't the Escambia County Sheriff's Office doing more to protect the Cantonment Sports Complex? Well, John, that's just one of many, areas, as you can well imagine, in Escambia County. And we do prioritize calls, and while certainly your sports complex is very important to us, You also ask about, why don't we have, basically hunting cameras that, deer hunters use, in wooded areas to monitor that. It is a matter, John, of priorities. And by that I mean, we respond to burglaries in progress, robberies in progress, domestic violence, drug dealing, and all sorts of, mayhem that's committed upon our citizens in Escambia County. And responses such as that are on a much lower priority. That's not meant to say that they're not a priority of that. And of course it is, our tax dollars pay for these complexes. And so we do respond to those, in addition to putting the cameras up. Of course, then someone has to go back and review the tapes and then take up the appropriate follow-on action. We'll certainly, pass your concerns on to our patrol operations, John, and see if, we can't step up some patrol activity in that area. And we'll do the best with what we have. Again, I share in your concern. I've been to your sports complex on more than one occasion, and it's a wonderful facility for the community. But right now, I would tell you that it's not getting focused primarily based upon, a list of priorities that we have in Escambia County. Jennifer asked about partnering with our animal control folks in starting a program. I know there's programs in other areas like this where inmates are brought in to not only assist at the kennels, but they refer to them as jail dogs, and the inmates actually help with the care and the feeding and the maintenance and cleanup of facilities, and it's part of their rehabilitation process. Well, of course, again, Jennifer, we don't run the jail. We're not engaged with the detention activities. But I would certainly call your county commissioner and make that recommendation. I know at one time there was a similar program years ago in Escambia County where that was part of a rehabilitation program with inmates where, it taught them to be responsible in the caring and feeding of an animal. And of course the county also, benefited from the fact that they had additional workers over at the kennels. I know that, putting animals down is a terrific thing. My wife and I are both animal lovers. We have a pet. But I can also tell you that, sometimes our overpopulation in Escambia County of cats and dogs, and especially cats, can be overwhelming. There are no-kill facilities. The SPCA here in town is a no-kill facility, and so they take a lot of animals in. Some animals will put down because of their breed. The vicious animals that are involved in attacks on humans, unfortunately, are normally put down when they're put into the facility. But we don't run animal control at the Escambia County Sheriff's Office, and so again I would direct you back to your Board of County Commissioners and specifically the Commissioner for your district and ask them about implementing that program. Teresa asked what can she do, and is there a number that she can text if she observes children in vehicles not in the appropriate restraining device or child restraint chair. Number one, Teresa, we can give you the number. It's very simple. It's a non-emergency number, and it's 436-9620, and that's Central Dispatch at the Escambia County Sheriff's Office. If you're in the county, in the city, you might want to call the PPD. That's a non-emergency situation, of course, unless there's been an accident. And not to be snarky about this, Teresa, but please don't text while you drive. So call 436-9620 in a safe manner and report this. Now here's the issue. Let's say from the time you call and the time that one of our officers arrives at the scene, that person has now restrained their child, if you will, with the appropriate restraining device. We can't issue a citation for that based upon your observation. So while we know this is frustrating to people, it's like speeding, it's like jaywalking, it's like a whole host of other things that for people that see these infractions and they are harmful to our community. That, you're putting a child's life at risk. We can't be everywhere all the time and see all things. So again, we would ask that you call and give us a courtesy call. Tell us the vehicle make and license number if you can get that. Again, safely obtain that. The color of the car, etc. And if we have a unit available, then that unit will be dispatched to check out your complaint. Now understand something though, that we use what's called a CAD, which is the Computer Assisted Dispatch. And so when calls come into the Escambia County Sheriff's Office, they are prioritized by the type of call. I mean, quite obviously at the top of that CAD list would be shots fired officer needs assistance, officer down, burglary in progress, involving a firearm, not involving a firearm. So, to respond to an observation by a citizen that they believe a child is not in an appropriate child restraining device, the child safety seat, you're going to be pretty low on that priority list. Last year in Escambia County, we responded to over 280,000 calls for service. That's more than one call for every man, woman, and child that lives in the county. So, again, while I share your frustration, I share your concern about the safety of children, that will probably be a low priority call. So if you call and a deputy doesn't immediately respond, please do not get too frustrated. Just remember there's probably a higher priority call in front of you, but we'll get to it when we can. James asks and is obviously frustrated by discourteous, fellow fishermen that go to some of our launch areas, and for areas that are specifically designated for, using a trailer and, launching a boat and then parking, because they're elongated parking spaces. And he's observed on more than one occasion at these launch areas, vehicles parked in those elongated areas without a trailer being attached. James, we share your frustration. You also say in your question, though, that a few weekends of ticketing, would, give deputies or give the county enough money to give our deputies a raise. All that money, James, that's a common misconception with people, whether it's parking violations or speeding violations, anything involving traffic, if you will, that money somehow comes back to the sheriff's coffers. Well, it doesn't. Those go back to specific funds controlled by the county and by the state. So while, on the surface it might be a pretty good idea, we don't do that to generate revenue. And we think that's right, by the way, because that's how in some states where that is allowable, you end up with, phantom stop signs and, speeders being, ticketed and, escorted to the clerk of the court where they have to immediately pay the ticket. And that's to generate revenue that goes right directly back to law enforcement. And that's how corruption starts. So we don't do that here. But I will also tell you that you also have to have them clearly marked, meaning there has to be signs specifically. So we'll have our traffic folks check with the county to see if there's an appropriate signage issue out there, meaning that they are up, clearly indicating to people. We can't assume that all fishermen or boaters are courteous, and then we'll re-emphasize to that. We do, by the way, throughout the season, do issue citations to that. But again, as you can well imagine, that's not a high priority item for us. We also have a unit that's called our pest control officers, which are parking enforcement specialists that work directly for the county, meaning the tickets they write goes back to the county coffers, not to us. And we'll get our pest control officers to see if we can't get them to start patrolling more of those areas. So we'll give them a go-do through the county and see if we can alleviate some of that problem for you. A tweet in, and the handle is Gator Girl. And Gator Girl asks, can we do something, or can you do something about the traffic out the back gate or the south gate of NAS Pensacola? Crossing a lot of jurisdictional lines here on that issue. As you well know, because the threat level in the United States due to increased terrorist activity around the world, not just in our country, military installations throughout the world, United States military installations, I should say, have implemented different security requirements and programs, to ensure the safety and security and the mission capability of their bases. And so we've been dealing with Captain Martin at NAS Pensacola about this very issue. We've had a couple of meetings already. It's particularly bad, when Blue Angels practice, etc., people parking on the roadways. The reason why is we currently have a perfect traffic storm, I guess is probably the best way to describe this. Your main gate entrance to Pensacola, or NAS Pensacola, excuse me, is now only for active duty personnel and certain vendors who are on a vendor list who can enter the main gate. All other traffic, visitors, etc., have been told to go around to the back gate, and you'll actually be turned around and sent to the back gate of NAS. So that in and of itself creates a traffic problem at the main gate. It increases, probably twofold the traffic now on the back gate, because you have so many visitors to our local area that are going out to the Naval Museum. And so now, instead of being able to access the Navy installation from both access points, the north gate and the south gate, if you will, they can't. All traffic is now funneled to the rear of NAS Pensacola. Now, further compound that problem with people getting on the base to go to work, getting off the base, going home. We now have a Blue Angel practice, etc. You have the perfect traffic storm. So we're working that issue with NAS. I can tell you there's not an easy answer to that. You have a certain number of people requiring or needing access to the installation. You have those who are wanting to watch, the Blue Angels practices, etc. And so therefore that's causing the issues at the base. So we're working with the base, our local traffic engineers. We'll try to keep you posted on that. But right now there's no easy short answer to your question other than go early and plan on staying late. Jack has a question about drones and the flying or use of drones within Escambia County and the city of Pensacola. Jack, number one, we don't utilize drones at the Escambia County Sheriff's Office right now. The reason being is law enforcement as opposed to the private use of drones. If you go and buy a drone this weekend at one of the local flea markets, which a lot of people do, you're required to check FAA regulations on how high you can fly it, overpopulated areas, etc. And they have a list of instructions, and you can go online and pull those instructions up. In addition to that, there are sometimes some additional ordinances that are passed, within cities and municipalities and sometimes counties that regulate that. I know one of the local television stations is now using a drone, and of course they go through and get all the FAA requirements for that. We don't use them in law enforcement because they are so restrictive. That's not to say at some point we may not have a drone at the Escambia County Sheriff's Office, but right now we can't fly a drone for surveillance without going through the appropriate organization, if you will, and also our court system to literally get the appropriate warrant to use any information that the drone picks up. So we found it to be so almost prohibitively restrictive at this time from a legal perspective that it's not cost effective for us to use a drone right now for law enforcement purposes. For just observation, surveillance, those sorts of things. I know a lot of people that use drones and they attach, right now they have such, hookups for Bluetooth capability and that sort of thing that they're primarily used recreationally. And again, some of the media outlets are starting to pick them up. But we don't regulate that. Those are flight regulations that are maintained and regulated by the FAA, which is, the Federal Aviation Administration. So go online and check those regulations if you're wanting to get into the drone business. The question is, the law on texting and driving, does it apply to first responders, not just law enforcement, but also fire department and EMS? And the answer to that question is it does not. Because of the nature of our work, law enforcement officers, when being dispatched, both over the radio, again, I mentioned earlier in an earlier question about the CAD, the officers have to respond to the computer-assisted dispatch, and the cell phone. All of those are part of, kind of a combination of alerting and communication devices that our officers are required to use. And so the laws as they apply to the everyday citizen do not apply to law enforcement. They are allowed to use their cell phones in the conduct of business during, again, the response to calls and when they're driving a vehicle. So while that may seem on its surface not to be completely fair, we're hoping that law enforcement officers understand that discretion that our legislature has given us is something, again, that should be very sacred to us. Why? Because we're required, because of the job, to do this. Hopefully they're not, pleasure calls, if you will. Dustin's question applies to moving to the state of Florida from the state of Mississippi and asking about the reciprocity agreement between the concealed carry licenses amongst the states and also the process of application to get his concealed carry license in the state of Florida. Number one, Dustin, thank you so much for moving to Florida. Welcome to Escambia County. As far as the reciprocity, if you'll go to myflorida.gov and look under licensing, you'll find the number of states that are currently on our list of reciprocity with the state of Florida. I don't have that in front of me right now, quite obviously, and that list has changed. We have had some states that we had a reciprocity agreement with, I know as early as last year, that we no longer have that agreement with. So I would recommend you go to that website, it's myflorida.gov, and check and see what states currently have reciprocity agreements. Now, your reciprocity agreement for concealed carry only applies when you are visiting the state of Florida or you're traversing our state. Let's say you're going to Georgia and you want to visit relatives while you're in the state of Florida and not drive straight through or avoid the state of Florida. And so that allows you, that and federal laws allow you a rite of passage, if you will, much like we honor your driver's license because you are a resident of the state of Mississippi. Now, what you must do upon establishing residency in Florida, just like you have to change your driver's license over, your car registration, etc., you will have to reapply for your concealed carry license within the state of Florida. So you can't just exchange it, if you will, and get that. It's a little different than exchanging your driver's license. There's a fingerprinting process, an update to your background check, and those sorts of things that will require you to do a reapplication of that. So you can't just turn in the one and the other. And I caution you on carrying under your Mississippi license while you're in Florida and you become a resident, because once you are a resident here, you must then obtain Florida credentials. So again, once you come, get established here, make sure that you, as promptly as possible, make application for the concealed weapons license in the state of Florida.
Do you have a program where you speak in schools or the libraries to educate the young ones?
Of course, we have a very robust school resource officer program. We also reach out to the young community. We have our Explorer program, 13 to 21 for young people. You'll see them around here. They've got a special uniform and they work the front desk and they do fingerprinting and a lot of community outreach activities. But yes, our school resource officer program outreaches. We teach some courses to schools and parents on gang activity in our schools. The gang experts tell you to start in the 3rd grade teaching children about gangs, and if you haven't diverted them by the 7th, you've lost them. Remember, you can also email your questions and ask the sheriff at escambiaso.com. We'll be back next week right here on Blab TV Tuesday night at 8 p.m.